you today?
Yes, I'm very good, thank you.
What do you make about this story, which is causing some ripples? It's on the front of the Daily Mail this morning. World's top scientists rage against lockdown, and life should be allowed to return to normal for all but the elderly and vulnerable. Now, these aren't just any scientists. They are top epidemiologists at Oxford University, Harvard University and Stanford University. And their point is that actually the public health effect, they're not talking necessarily about the economic effects, they're talking about the other public health effects of lockdown on vaccinations, on scans, on screening for cancers. The fallout of a lockdown has been terrible for public health generally, and that if the vulnerable and the elderly shielded, everybody else could get some form of herd immunity.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for every one of those experts, there are several others who think the opposite. That's the problem, isn't it? That it affects the thinking of scientific experts differently, just as the virus affects people differently when it infects them. And I think that there's value in both approaches. If we know that lockdown works in reducing the prevalence rates and allows the NHS to cope, but at the expense of mental health and social mobility and education. On the other hand, we can't guarantee herd immunity by having this age-related apartheid where you protect the vulnerable who can't do anything and mix with any young people and go about their normal work, and young people can go off and get the virus mildly or moderately and then hope for herd immunity. We can't guarantee herd immunity, and what really worries a lot of people is the fact that we don't know enough about this virus yet to say there are no long-term effects. We know that there are long-term effects. Long COVID is being increasingly described.
But how can we know what the long-term effects are when it's only existed for 8 months?
Exactly.
I mean, that's the key thing I keep reminding people.
Exactly.
We don't know what the sting in the tail may be.
That's right. I mean,
for anybody, right?
People are talking not just about, you know, damaged lungs, damaged hearts, damaged liver and kidney and central nervous system, but they're worried about long-term things like Parkinson's disease as a result of these viral infections.
But if we talk about long-term effects, Dr. Hilary, it's one of the things that they mention in their open letter, which they're calling the Barrington Declaration.
Yep.
And it says that the long-term effects on public health, lower childhood vaccination rates, worsening cardiovascular disease outcomes, then, of course, the mental health, the cancer screenings, leading to greater excess mortality in years to come, with the working class and younger members of society carrying the heaviest burden.
Yeah, but what they don't take into account is that if you don't control the virus sufficiently, all of those services that look after heart disease and cancer can't function. We only have a limited amount of staff in the NHS, a limited amount of hospital beds. So if they become overwhelmed, you can't see any patients with cancer.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because, of course, the health secretary got
but I don't agree with this,
Well,
Hilary.
can we just talk about this, Matt Hancock?
I was about to rail, I've got to hear.
Yeah.
The point, I got really angry yesterday. I see Matt Hancock almost threatening people. Let's see what he said.
It's critical for everybody to understand that the best way to keep cancer services running is to suppress the disease. And the more the disease is under control, the more that we can both recover and continue with cancer treatments. And it's beholden on all of us to make the case, I believe, that controlling this virus not only reduces the number of deaths directly from coronavirus, but also enables us as best as possible to recover the treatment that we need to for cancer and other killer diseases.
I have a real problem with this because
Absolutely.
he boasts all the time about building all these Nightingale hospitals in a week, right? Bang, like that, when they needed to for COVID. Why is it that anyone suffering from cancer right now who's having treatment has to hear a health secretary basically using their treatment and therefore their ability to stay alive as some kind of sword of Damocles over this whole COVID thing? I think it was an outrageous thing to say.
On COVID.
If I was a cancer patient, I'd be like, sorry, what? You mean if you don't get your act together as health secretary, which, by the way, he hasn't done now for 8 months, if you don't, then I have to die. Is that it?
No, I think what he's saying is that we are struggling to get early diagnosis. Patients are reluctant to come into general practice at the moment and discuss their symptoms, which may be significant. They may be indicative of an early cancer.
But then his job is to fix that, Hilary.
Well, it's always been his job to fix that, and we've always needed to do better.
And he hasn't fixed it.
But when you've got a highly infectious and dangerous virus around, you've got to protect those vulnerable people, because if you're on chemotherapy, if you're having a radiotherapy and your immune system is already damaged by cancer or heart disease, then they're equally more vulnerable.
Hold that thought. Let's come back to this after the break.